What's up, BattleTech fans? Lately, we've been taking a look at the evolution of the game's visual history over the last 40 years. But one thing you'll hear on the space lanes quite often where BattleTech is concerned is just how little the game's rules have evolved over that time. On Finding the Facts in the Fiction, we take a look at the often retold tales from around the tabletop. The ones you'll hear concerning rules changes and how things used to work back in the good old days. At the end of the day, there's a lot of truth to the statement that BattleTech's rules haven't really changed much over the course of the years. And I've been there for nearly 30 of them. Of all the minor rule changes over the years, there are no two bigger offenders, no more dastardly of a duo, no other callous cat of a heel that can even come close to partial cover and physical attacks. At least in my opinion. Partial cover is a good example of one of those small rule changes that's remembered for how big it was. But the rules for physical attacks had to get cleaned up more often than a gas station bathroom. So let's slide down the razor's edge one more time and take a look at the rule changes for physical attacks and partial cover. Today, when firing at a target in partial cover, we add +1 to the 2-hit roll during shot calculation, and any successful attack that strikes a leg location is retroactively declared a miss. Back in the day, striking a target in partial cover was far more difficult. In order to represent the unit's coverage, a +3 penalty was added onto the 2-hit number, but a hit was a hit. Paying the partial cover penalty previously allowed a successful attack to strike the target, period. The attack location would then be determined by a roll of 1d6, consulting the punch hit location table, as opposed to a standard hit location roll using 2d6. I mean, sure, a 1 in 6 chance to hit the head doesn't sound like a lot when you're staring down the barrel of a loaded medium laser. But you're playing Russian roulette by proxy if it's a Gauss rifle, an ERPPC, or one of the other myriad of weapons that can knock your fucking block off in one go from down range. Say, what is it people are so hot for about these kind of things anyway? What?! It seems the rule persisted in the original fashion all the way up to the release of Total Warfare. Even the revised edition of the BattleTech Master Rules had it in 1998. So this means players used this version of the rules exclusively for the first half of the game's lifetime. The original Total Warfare was a FanPro WizKids production, which came about after the revised BattleTech Master Rules in the early 2000s. So technically, the old way was the only way for more than half.
You are technically correct. The best kind of correct.
This rule was just something I never questioned as a kid, but in hindsight, the old way makes partial cover way OP. You either have folks purposely doing it to keep their opponent from even wanting to shoot at the covered unit in the first place, or a shot kneecaps a player's force with one lucky, albeit well-placed, blow. So what you wind up with in this instance is players doing whatever they have to in order to find the lowest possible number for them to roll without having to just walk up to the enemy and stand still. To me, this makes the game no longer about the same thing anymore, and the action of the day now becomes gerrymander my 2-hit roll so I can actually land a friggin' shot. And this creates what we know today as a negative play experience. Honestly, either of these outcomes are just overall not where you want to be when you sit down to play a game of BattleTech. You feel me? The rules for physical attacks, however, those were... well, let me show you. If you're at all familiar with today's way of doing things, you'll know that all your physical attacks start out by using your character's piloting skill as the base modifier, with some types of physical attacks receiving a bonus or penalty based on ease of execution. This trend started as an optional rule in 1997's Maximum Tech, and even that isn't the final iteration of rule changes surrounding physical attacks. Let's see the progression. Back then, each physical attack type had its own separate base-to-hit number, and not all of them were the same. Kicking was still the easiest, starting at a base-to-hit number of 3, while punching and pushing both had a base-to-hit number of 4, presumably because both actions are so similar to one another. I know they tell you never hit a man with a closed fist, but it is, on occasion, hilarious.
Wacky fun.
Charging was far more difficult of an action at base 5, and Death from Above shared the same modifier because, get this, it was also considered to be a charging attack. You'd actually have to go as far forward as Total Warfare to stop seeing DFA attacks being referred to as charges. All the older rule sets exclusively call it a charge by name, while both editions of the Master Rules only allude to it, noting that a DFA might do less damage than a quote-unquote standard charging attack. Do I want to charge him? I think that's... but if I charge him, it's a high kick too. Does that again? Do I want to try and harder charge? Kicking is way easier. I think that's only a... The genius of the Maximum Tech system is that a character with Gunnery Skill 4, Piloting Skill 5 would need the same numbers to hit the same attacks under the standard rules. Think about it. If you took a kick under the old standard rules, you'd start with a base to hit number of 3. Add +2 on if you ran, for example, and if your opponent had a +2 defense with no terrain involved in the equation, you'd be left with 7 or better to make the shot. Under today's rules, you'd start with a 5 piloting skill, add 2 for your run, 2 for the target defense, because there's no terrain, and you get a -2 bonus because of the new rules. 7 or better is the number you need. A charging unit under the old rules would add a 5 base to hit number, +2 for your run, +2 for your target defense, leaving you a 9 under the same circumstances. Today's game, you would have literally the exact same numbers.
Can you repeat the part of this stuff where you said all about the things?
But here's where things get tricky. As the pilot advances in skill, Maximum Tech not only gave players a more accurate way to represent that skill when it came to these kind of maneuvers, but it also gave a bonus or penalty to all but 3 of the possible physical attacks it listed. One important thing to notice is that punching was given a -1 bonus alongside pushing. A lot of older players remember this and, like myself, carried that knowledge with them well beyond the time when it was no longer the case. The -1 bonus for punching was removed with Total Warfare, but eagle-eyed players can see the descendant of this rule in the BattleMech Manual's Battle Fists quirk. So, don't worry. Your precious Atlas or your Awesome can still throw hands at -1, but only under an optional rule set. And speaking of optional rule sets, in both Battle Droids and BattleTech 2nd Edition, a player goes through 3 stages of training. A beginner mode covers the basics of understanding gameplay, an advanced section expands upon what the player already knows, and an expert section presents additional rules marked as optional for the seasoned veteran player. Where 1st Edition gameplay is concerned, physical attacks of any kind aren't covered in the beginner rules, with punches and kicks coming only in the advanced rule set. Pushing and charging attacks were considered the elite rules, and thusly were reserved as optional and strictly for the expert players. Death from above was simply not an attack type you could choose in 1st Edition gameplay. It didn't exist yet. With 2nd Edition, the rebrand gave us the DFA, but as I say, it was a charging attack. Sir, I'm going to charge this building. From where? From inside this other building. No, I mean, from where? From the air, bitch! This sounds like something Robotech would do. And honestly, it looks like the 2nd Edition rulebook was misprinted in such a way as to make all physical attacks look like optional rules. The way the wording is written makes me think that wasn't the intention, it's just the fact that no physical attack rules exist in either the beginner or advanced rule sections in 2nd Edition, only appearing in the expert section clearly under a tag of being optional. So if you were a rules as written type of guy, you might be confused for a little bit. Naturally, the rules being all over the place for so long led to some common misconceptions that I find some players still think are true today. More than one player I've met in the last few years has been absolutely sure that hatchet attacks used to be resolved via punch locations. And speaking of physical weapons, in the 1st editions of the game, only the most basic of physical attacks existed: punching, kicking, pushing, and charging, which included death from above after 2nd edition. Strange as it may seem, hatchets weren't codified into the rules until what appears to be the BattleTech Compendium in 1990. But before the hatchet, there was the club. 'Cause you know, when you hit up the city, you gotta head down to the club. Objects such as steel girders from the rubble of ruined buildings, uprooted trees, or even the arms blown off of other mechs could be used to bludgeon an opponent with pure blunt force if you just had no better options laying around. Much like Death from Above began its life cycle as a type of charging attack, the hatchet entered into the rules as a clubbing attack, with only one arm being necessary instead of 2. This gave the pilot the extra flexibility of being able to fire weapons from their machines freehand and still swing the hatchet in the same turn. Another commonality the hatchet attack shares with the DFA is the club verbiage seems to persist all the way up to the revised edition of the BattleTech Master Rules, with Total Warfare appearing to codify them as their own separate form of attack first. Which makes a lot more sense under the current piloting skill-based system. You can trace the genesis of all physical weapons back to the basic clubbing attacks, but you know how it was back then. Everything was changing. Clubs opened the door for swords, hatchets, and all kinds of other things.
All right, the cheat. Let's keep this party moving. On to the next clue.
So the next time you're carving your opponent up like a Christmas turkey or landing that vaunted Highlander burial, just be grateful it's a far smoother process today than it's ever been. And speaking of smooth, while I got you here, do me a big favor and hit that subscribe bell down there. Turn on all notifications so you can find out exactly where Battlebound's gonna turn up next. And I want to hear from you. What's your favorite type of physical attack? Tell me your thoughts and feelings, and don't forget to share this video with your favorite mecha nerds. I'm Tuck Davian, and I'm looking forward to seeing you next time, right here, out on the Space Lane.
Be sure to smash our like button and subscribe to our channel.
Crowdfunding is when lots of people give you small amounts of money to help your passion project come to life.